Welcome everybody to this second webinar, AfricaLics webinar. And I recognize that we are having participation from all over the world, across the globe, which I think is a good thing. It shows the growing interest in the innovation and development field. I think it also confirms that people are getting interested in what AfricaLics is doing. So we appreciate everybody who is able to join us today. Just to mention, AfricaLics has scheduled seminars in the course of the year. And most of these seminars are actually going to be focusing on innovation and development field. So we are hoping that you'll be able to join us. So today today we are going to be focusing on one of the series. We held one last month, the first webinar last month, and it was focusing on innovation, the history of AfricaLics and the field of innovation and development studies research in Africa. We had two speakers then, Professor Rudval, who is, I think we all agree with me, he's the founding father of GlobalX as well as AfricaLics. We had Bitrina Diamet, who happens to be the first president of AfricaLics. We do have now a new president. And they were speaking on different aspects of AfricaLics, the origin and the field of innovation and development research in Africa. We had an intervention from Professor Mamo Muchi, responding to the two speakers, what Bar and Bitrina were able to share with us in terms of where we are coming as a network and the field in Africa. So today's webinar is actually a continuation of what was discussed during the first webinar. But there were key highlights, key issues that came up from that webinar, which I cannot actually summarize what was discussed during that particular webinar. It was a very, very rich webinar. There were a number of issues which were coming up. But a few of them had to do with, what do we know about this particular field? And there was a consensus that this particular field, it is important. It is important for us in Africa in terms of informing decision-making, informing what we do as scholars in Africa. So there was a consensus that this is a very key field which needs to be pursued. There was also an agreement that this particular field is still underdeveloped in Africa. There is a lot that needs to be done in terms of developing our scholars to be able to inform policy and practice. There is a lot that needs to be done. So that was coming out very clearly in the conversation that was held during the first webinar. Another thing which was coming out during the first webinar was the challenges that we are having as a continent. And one of the issue is capabilities. How do we build the capabilities in this particular field? There were other issues that came up that was very, very key. It was coming out that we really need to develop this particular field in terms of capabilities. Then during the intervention by Mamo, people were a bit excited about an issue he raised. There was the acknowledgement that Africa needs to engage in discussions that are happening in Africa, in the world. And there was this aspect that was raised that relates to the fourth industrial revolution and what it can do for Africa. There was an agreement that the new technological innovations can actually, contribute to Africa's sustainable development. But then there was the question on what is the implication. So there was an agreement that we actually need to, rethink the way we are doing things in terms of research. We need to rethink, in terms of how we structure and our policies, how we implement our policies, the need for a paradigm shift. So that conversation was quite rich. And of course, it's something which is going to inform our conversation today, today's webinar. There was also another issue that relates to, what are the solutions for Africa in terms of sustainability, and the agreement that we all need to join together in terms of contribution to what needs to be happening. So the joined up activities in terms of research, in terms of policy, engaging all the stakeholders, that was an issue that was coming up during the discussion. So today's webinar, as I said, at the beginning, is actually a continuation of, that conversation that was started last month. And today the focus is just, deepening the conversation further, focusing on what do we really understand this particular field in the context of Africa. We know that we have a unique context that actually defines what we do. And of course, the issue of what are the priorities for now and for the future in this particular field. So today we are going to be having, key speakers. We do have Erica, we do have Rebecca, and Professor Abdulkader. Erica is going to give us highlights on the history of I&D, based on some previous, research and surveys that was conducted at the Breakout and AfricaLics. And she's also going to moderate the plenary discussion. We do have Rebecca, who is going to be guiding us and giving us some highlights on what is happening now, based on what AfricaLics has been pursuing, some study that AfricaLics has been pursuing. Then we do have Abdulkader, who is going to actually highlight, have a reflection on the discussions in general, the breakout sessions, as well as, the plenary discussions. But we are going to be banking on, his long-standing experience in this particular field, his engagement in AfricaLics, matters, both as a board member and also previously as a Breakout scientific board member. We do have breakout sessions, which are going to be focusing on those two issues that I mentioned earlier. Asking the question, what do we understand? Do we understand the topic? Because we actually need to understand the topic before we engage. And then, of course, looking at the future. So those are the two key issues that are going to be reflected on in the breakout sessions. And to help us in the discussions, we are going to have Professor Sama from Algeria. We do have Ayinde, Professor Ayinde from Nigeria, and Diran from South Africa, and Dr. Mufogo from Cameroon. But just to remind us, because we are familiar with AfricaLics, this is something that we have considered as a motto. Whenever we meet up, we need to engage openly. And as we engage, we also need to have fun. And I would want you to actually remember that, within this network, whenever we meet, we need to engage openly and also have fun as well. So this is our motto. And therefore, I'm going to hand over to Erica to read us in the next session. And I encourage you to have fun and also to engage, so that we can engage in a productive discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Anne, for that wonderful introduction. And I would like to take an opportunity to say hello to everybody. I'm seeing a lot of very familiar names as participants, and it's really great to have an opportunity to have this seminar. But let me not take too much time, because time is short today, and we have quite a lot that we would like to discuss and to talk amongst us. And I would like to take perhaps just 10 minutes or so to give you an introduction and share with you some of the earlier sort of research and findings that we've had from various mapping exercises that have looked at the evolution of the field of innovation studies in the context of Africa. Can everybody see my slides? If I can get some thumbs up. Yes? Okay.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, let me just put it on a presentation mode. Okay, wonderful. So in the next 10 minutes or so, I'll take a bit of time to go through as I mentioned, the findings from some earlier studies that I've done. So I'll introduce myself briefly, but I've been introduced already. My name is Erika Kremer-Mbula. I'm a professor of economics at the University of Johannesburg, where I am leading a trilateral chair in transformative innovation, the 4IR, and sustainable development. So I'll go through 3 key points. Some of them are longer than others. The first one is sort of like looking back. How did innovation studies in Africa look like 10 or 15 years ago? Then I'll present some of a summary of some of the efforts that we've done in surveying, trying to understand how does this community look like, where are we located, what are we doing, what are our interests and our composition in terms of gender and disciplinary background and so on. So I'll just present some of the results from surveys that have been conducted. One preliminary survey or a pilot survey that happened in 2012, one in 2014 and one in 2016, and then just a few reflections. Just to start with, how did the innovation studies in Africa look like about 10, 15 years ago? Well, the academic community within Africa was very small and very dispersed. The field of innovation and development in Africa has a relatively short life. And although this community has gone through a lot of changes, initially it was quite dispersed and disconnected. It was identified as having very little intra-African collaboration, and one could see much more collaboration happening between African scholars and institutions in the West and the North, rather than across the continent. This was an issue for various reasons that I will come back to later, perhaps. But also there were very few organizations dedicated to the study of innovation in Africa. Hardly any units conducting research on innovation, and very few postgraduate training courses also focused on innovation. Also the few scholars that existed didn't have many platforms to interact and to exchange ideas. Some of the few events that provided with these platforms were the AfricaLics conference that took place in South Africa, based at Tshwane University of Technology in 2005, and then the AfricaLics event in Senegal in 2009. Obviously, they were followed later on by those in Ethiopia and Ghana, but I'm referring now to sort of like the origins, the earlier stages of the innovation community in Africa. So at the beginning, there were very few events to interact. The little collaboration across African scholars also somehow was connected to a limited orientation to address African problems, and that's related also to the reliance, or the high reliance on external funding, which sometimes guided the topics and the themes of interest outside the core sort of developmental issues or emerging issues in the context of Africa. And that is something, again, that it would be great to dedicate some time in the breakout rooms to discuss in more detail. There were very few scholarly contributions addressing innovation and developmental issues in Africa. There are some of those, such as the very highly cited Putting Africa First book by Mamo Bentoke and Peter Gamelow. And then also others such as Banji and a number. I couldn't list the several contributions, but there were quite few if we have to put them on a list as compared to what we see now. In summary, at the beginning, we realized that we knew quite little about the African innovation community. We had a sense that these issues existed, but we didn't have evidence to substantiate these claims. So there was an understanding that we need to map the innovation research community in Africa, and AfricaLics was quite aware of that. And in fact, in preparation for the All Africa seminar that happened in Dar es Salaam in 2012, there was a pilot survey that was conducted by myself and Watu Wamai, where we ran a survey it was a very short survey that ran at the beginning of March. We basically took the list of contacts from the AfricaLics network, those that were African researchers, and then we added some other IDRC affiliates in Africa that we had contacts for, and we ran a survey asking a number of things that had to do with their profile, their research interests, their disciplinary background, and so on. Also we asked them about 10 people with whom they had regular interactions or contacts. That helped us identify a larger extended network of AfricaLics, so to speak. So we got to about 212 names. And also it allowed us to identify a larger set of African and international organizations that were active in the field of innovation and development. There were various findings from that pilot survey that I will go through very quickly. But initially there was a very large, what we identified is that there was a very large proportion of researchers that were located in South Africa and Nigeria, more than half. And then you saw a smaller distribution across the rest of African countries. A large majority of researchers were male, about 70% almost. It was a very large network, so the majority of researchers were between 30 and 45 years old, and social sciences was predominant, particularly coming from economic management, business sort of disciplinary backgrounds. There was 20% or so of representation of natural sciences and engineering, and 6% in humanities. These also helped us identify some issues that were relevant for that community, and some issues sort of jumped out, such as those related to skills, learning, capability development, in other words, and issues related to competitiveness and economic growth based on business enterprises, particularly looking at productivity, efficiency, and also an interest in small firms. There was a sectoral focus on agriculture, health, pharmaceuticals, ICTs, and so on. And then issues that had to do with context-related issues like poverty and sustainability and so on. This exercise also helped us identify topics of interest for AfricaLics and areas where there was already some level of initial work that was being conducted. It was very useful as an indication of the work ahead. So we realized we need to actually improve the coverage of the mapping exercise, and we need to strengthen the ties across collaborations that we managed to identify. So that led us to conduct the second and the third survey exercises, which were the more substantial mapping exercises conducted by the then AfricaLics Secretariat in 2014 and 2016. The study in 2014 was an invitation to over 260 contacts, and then there was wider dissemination. And the study in 2016 built on that previous list and added more social media and online dissemination to capture responses beyond the contact list. It was a two-stage survey. So in the first part, there was information requested about the researcher and the activities, teaching activities and research activities and output. And the second one was more about training programs and capacities and institutional collaborations. I won't have time to present all of those, but just to give you a flavor, the gender of the respondents didn't change much actually between the two mapping exercises in 2014 and 2016. And I'm comparing in the next slides the results in those two for an easier sort of comparison. But we see that the proportion of male researchers against the female researchers has not changed much, and this tells us something about an area of change for our community. It continues to be a very young network or community of researchers, with the majority of researchers being less than 45 years old, also representative of our continent and the demographics within. In terms of the country of residence, we see that South Africa and Nigeria are still dominating. Many of the respondents are coming or living resident in those countries, but we see somehow in the 2016 a higher representation of other countries such as Kenya and Ethiopia and other countries. So it becomes in a way a more balanced representation of the different African countries. In terms of the disciplinary background, we see still a predominance of social sciences, but perhaps others, and the inner circle is 2014 and the outer circle is 2016. We see natural sciences and humanities in the outer circle, as you see, gaining some more visibility in terms of the disciplinary background as representing our community. Most of the researchers identified in the mapping exercise are affiliated to universities, and that hasn't changed. But we see other kind of stakeholders too, and we see particularly, for instance, government affiliations seem to increase over time. So they represent about 15% of the respondents in 2016. I think this is probably a testament of the efforts that the network has done to produce sort of relevant, policy-relevant research and engagement that has been happened with government agencies across the continent. The research community is actively publishing, and it seems to be growing in terms of the active publishers in the field. We see the comparison here between 2014 and 2016. Just as a small illustration of those publications that were able to capture in these mapping exercises. You see that there's been an increase, right? So from 44 book chapters in 2014 to 114, from 147 journal articles to 436. So we see a very substantial increase of publications. It's worth noting that, for instance, in terms of books, the majority of books were published in Europe or outside of Africa. So very few African publishers, and that affects also book chapters. But in terms of journal articles, we saw journals published both in African and international journals. There's quite a detailed description there of the publication analysis that I encourage everybody to have a look at those reports, which are available on the web. We see the community still dedicated mostly to capacity building. So when we ask the respondents whether they teach or they provide any training on innovation and development, the 60% or so respond yes. And this hasn't changed between 2014 and 2016. This contrasts with the focus on research, particularly funded research. So we see only a smaller percentage, 25% or so of the respondents holding research grants, and that hasn't changed over time either. Something that has changed and is worth noting is that initially in the 2014 mapping exercise, most of the respondents had participated in some GlobalX event, with only about 20-something% having not participated in a GlobalX event. So it was a representation of how the surveys were conducted and the list of contacts and so on. Then in 2016, you can see that 65% are actually outside of the GlobalX community. They haven't participated before. So it's new, a new outreach that is represented here. And most of them actually are now part of the AfricaLics community. They have participated in AfricaLics events, and the community is growing and reaching out to a broader population. Just very briefly commenting some of the themes. We can see a change in the reported research themes of focus. I won't go through all of them, but you can see that some of the themes that were important in 2013 or 2014 survey have decreased over time. For instance, agricultural innovation systems or food security, and those studies related to BRICS or design capacity building for economic development. But that doesn't mean that these themes are not relevant on their own. They take a different shape and form. And if you see the new themes emerging in 2016, you can see them, issues around agriculture, around engineering, and so on, somehow packed in a different way in a set of new themes and more broader and more representative of the set of developmental core issues in the continent. So some conclusions, just to finalize. The landscape has changed a lot in the last 10, 15 years until now. So you can see the network has expanded, the collaborations have increased, the research outputs have grown, somehow the platforms for interactions have also increased. There's more conferences, more workshops, there are new topics that are just emerging, and this is all very positive. There are many things that haven't changed that much, or perhaps not enough. The female representation remains very low. African publishers remain small in comparison to international outlets, and we're still focusing on capacity building. It's not a negative thing, but research and innovation and development is still outweighed by our need to capacitate the continent in a way. Thank you very much. I think I'll stop there, and now we can move to the next presentation.
Thanks, Erica. We're going to move rapidly on. Please keep your comments coming in the chat. For some reason, it's not letting me share. 1 second. Please, yeah, as I say, please keep the comments coming in the chat. We will come back to your comments and questions as the presentation, after the presentation. Now my system has decided to freeze, which is not useful. Anyway, while I work out what's happening, let me say that I am going to present details of a set of research that's ongoing. It is being conducted by a range of different people. Colleagues of mine at the African Center for Technology Studies, and also the external consultant team within Technopolis. There is an external evaluation of AfricaLics that is currently ongoing, and they are conducting some bibliometrics and social network analysis, both of the AfricaLics membership and of the broader field across Africa. No, I still have issues. What I'm going to share with you is a set of...
Do you want me to bring them up?
Yeah, please, Margareta. It's just frozen, my... Perfect. Okay. If you can move to the... Can I... request, yeah. So I'm going to start where Erica finished. I'm then going to move on to an analysis of papers that have been published by AfricaLics members. I'm then going to drill down to conference papers, and then I'm going to say something more about the location of scholars and who the different scholars are. I'm going to talk about what we haven't managed to talk about yet or research yet. So what is missing? And then I'm going to introduce the group work. Next slide, please. So as Erica mentioned, there were these set of 7 research gaps or thematic areas that required attention that were recognized at the All Africa seminar in Dar es Salaam in 2012, which so it was the official starting point of AfricaLics. Next slide, please. So these areas are on the right-hand side of your screen. We will share the slides with you, so if you cannot see them at the moment, please don't worry too much. You can look at the slides in more detail after this presentation. The thematic areas range in from looking at specific sectoral areas where there's been deemed to be a gap in research around agricultural, agro-industrial innovation systems and energy, the role of women, work organization, so at a firm level, and then some bigger themes around the role of different countries in innovation activities and the role of finance. And the rationale for those is presented on the left-hand side of the table. Next slide. So as Erica mentioned, these were areas that were deemed to be lacking in research. So in 2013, with funding from the Swedish SIDA, AfricaLics undertook to fund, with some very small seed money, a series of multi-country research consortia to investigate some of these areas. We awarded 6 projects and across 5 of the thematic areas. We were unable to fund a project in finance and innovation, or in the area of BRICS and their influence on innovation in Africa, which was due to the fact that we didn't have enough people interested or working in that area, particularly the area of financial innovation. We just didn't have enough people working in that area at the time. What's interesting now is to see whether we have those same research gaps still existing. So if I could get the next slide. This is a very draft set of results from the Technopolis team. It is still being worked on. What they have been doing is looking at the publications of all the AfricaLics members that we have in our database. So we have over nearly 700, over 600 members in the database at the moment. We've been looking at their publications using Microsoft Academic. We're using that over Scopus or Web of Science because, as we all know, and most African scholars are unable to have their publications recognized in those databases. Microsoft Academic also has a wider number of publications included, so it's not just journal or books. What we see is at the highest level of general topic area, so the graph on the left, we see that the majority, or not the majority, but a vast number of publications by AfricaLics scholars are in the area of business, political science, economics, and to some lesser extent geography. But what we also see is that we have a number of other areas in which people are publishing, and particularly when we narrow it down and we look in more depth at their publications, we see that there's quite a significant number of publications that are focused in the area of economic growth, broadly defined, and then also at the level of development economics and industrial organization, but then at a range of other areas as well, many of which are agricultural focused or environmental focused. Next slide. So this is the status in 2021. We then drill down into the conferences, what has been published or rather presented at GlobalX and AfricaLics conferences. And what we can see, what we did was we looked at the titles of people's papers and where accessible, the abstracts of those papers. And we took out keywords from those. And by looking at what keywords people used in their titles and abstracts, have been able to try and understand what conceptual approach people have used in their paper. We can see that there's quite a large number of people who are more focused on firm level innovation management. So that's this first peak on the left. And we see that there are a number of people who have been using systems approaches, and that's the peak on the right. We also have a number who are looking at capabilities, learning and knowledge type issues, which is the first, where the starting point on the right hand side. Next slide, please. So this is just how we categorize the papers. We won't go into that more. Next slide. When we invert the data, what we see is that this orange line at the top, which is innovation management, firm level studies, has tended to dominate the conference papers since the first GlobalX conference that was held in Africa in 2005. There is an anomaly here, the green line under Dakar. This is because we only have the conference paper titles for Dakar, and so they all fall in the other category at the moment. So we need to do a bit more work there, but we can see the next blue line, which has an X in it, that is related to systems thinking, and we can see that the number of papers that have been focused on systems, whether it's national innovation systems, regional, sectoral, technological innovation systems thinking, has gone up and down, and seems to be on a downward trend in recent years, along with the second blue line, which relates to capabilities, capabilities and learning. Next slide, please. So bearing in mind the fact that we see a lot of agricultural papers by our AfricaLics members, and this focus on climate and also innovation management, we thought that these would be the dominant sectors for papers at the conferences. And we see that in some conferences that was indeed the case. So Kigali, we had quite a number of papers. That's Kigali AfricaLics conference in 2015, quite a high number of papers that focused on climate, natural resource management, or environmental issues. And in Ghana in 2018, the GlobalX conference, we had quite a large number of papers that looked at agriculture. But we also noticed that across these conferences, the other category is actually really quite high. So we need to go into more depth here and see what these other areas, sectoral areas that people have been studying are. Next slide, please. Very much validating the details that Erica presented earlier. Conference participants are predominantly male. Around 30% across all conferences are female lead authors. And we still see a dominance of lead authors from Eastern and Western Africa, with Nigeria making up over 90% of all West African participants at conferences, and Kenyan participants at conferences making up on average 46%. This data on lead author location is just for AfricaLics conferences. So it will look slightly different when we add the GlobalX data in as well. Next slide, please. What we see here is where AfricaLics members as a whole are based. And we see that actually it's a slightly more complicated story. And although we have quite a dominance of participation at conferences from Nigeria and from Kenya, actually the wider membership of AfricaLics is a lot more spread out. But we do also notice that we have a number of countries that we have no participation from. And one of the interesting issues will be why that would be the case. Next slide, please. So we also looked at how this fits within the broader situation with a very quick and dirty review of the keywords innovation and Africa on Google Scholar. Those two keywords yield 2.6 million publications. Of the first 100, when it's set to the most relevant searches, we get 22, so 20% are focused on agriculture in their title. Quite positively, we find that the lead author of over 50% are African, 16 are Africans in the diaspora. Many of the, well, not many, but at least 3, I think it's 3 or 4 of those publications are actually the same person, Calestis Juma. We have 11 Nigerian, again, we have Banji Oyinka as having a majority or a large number of those, 8 South African and 7 Kenyan. So again, very much following the same dominant kind of groupings of where researchers in this field are based, as Erica presented. Putting Africa first, which Erica mentioned and is seen by some people as one of the key first texts by an African author in this field, is in the top 100 and is cited 217 times. It comes at number 4 on the list of most cited publications in that first 100. Next slide, please. So what's missing? Well, as I say, there's a lot still missing. We've still got a lot of data to work through, and there's still the anomalies to be dealt with. We do seem to be getting a better sense of what use of innovation studies thinking has been done in Africa. What we don't necessarily have, though, is a sense of what innovation and development studies as a combined field or as a new field might look like. As I say, we have a good idea of what innovation studies looks like in terms of conceptual, theoretical, and sectoral focus. But we haven't even started thinking methodologically, particularly whether there are key methodological approaches, paradigms or designs, research, data collection and analysis methods that are used more or differently in the African context versus other parts of the world. And we haven't considered this in relation to teaching, but as Erica's study highlighted, there is a significant linkage between what teaching is available, particularly at postgraduate level, and subsequent research that occurs. And there's also then the question of how policy debates and funding debates and who funds research also interlinks with what research actually happens. So all of this still needs to be done. And next slide, please. As I say, we will be continuing to look at this. Technopolis are in the middle of their external evaluation. They will be sending out the results of their bibliometrics and social network analysis in the coming weeks, and holding some learning workshops with members of the network as a result. And we hope that a number of you will join those. A number of us are trying to put together the results of these different studies into a journal paper, so please look out for that in the next coming months. But what we'd like you to do now, and for the rest of this webinar, is to do some to get into groups and tell us what you think the field looks like now, and where you think it should be heading in the future. So, sorry, can you move to the next slide? I tried to do it and it tried to throw me out. We're going to move you into breakout rooms. There are 3 breakout rooms. One has been designated for French speakers who are participating. Each room will have a facilitator, and there will be one or two scribes, people who will write up the comments that are said. We will use Padlet, an online whiteboard or flip chart application, to collate the comments. You can directly add your comments into that online whiteboard called Padlet. We will share the link in each of the breakout rooms at the start of the breakout session, and you can click on the link and it will take you to the Padlet. We will come back to plenary after 20 minutes. You will all be assigned a room. When we hit the button, everybody will move seamlessly, we hope, into a breakout room, and then the facilitators will take over. I can give a demonstration of Padlet now if you, or I should be able to if my screen decides to work. So let's see. Okay, so hopefully you can see at the top of this of my page, there's the address for the web address for this Padlet. This will be copied into the chat of each breakout room, and then you will be able to click on any of these plus buttons, and you can type in your comments. And then if you press return, it will return you on the screen. So just click anywhere outside of the box and it will post your message. You can like somebody's message if you would like, and you can comment on somebody's message if you would like as well. So if you feel confident, you can do this, or you can just write in the chat or speak your comments, and the scribes in each group will note down what you've said and add it to the Padlet. So I think I will stop there and hand back to Erica. Thank you all very much, and look forward to your comments and thoughts in the plenary session shortly.
Great, thanks so much, Becky, for that presentation. I think I can see that we are sort of also moving with time. So I think we should try and move to the breakout sessions. As Becky has indicated, please keep your comments from these 2 presentations either on the chat or written up, and we'll try to cover them in plenary later on. So I believe that we will be taken out to the breakout rooms. Hi everyone, and welcome back from the breakout rooms. It always feels short, but it's just an indication of how much we have to discuss and the benefits of coming together and trying to get our heads around the field in which we're working. Particularly as there are sort of the conceptual issues, the methodological issues, and the sectoral aspects. So in this, I hope you had a chance to discuss in this first breakout session your understanding of the field of innovation and development, and you've had some discussion around the concepts and theories, the methods and the sectors, and other issues. What I would ask is each one of the facilitators to just give us a minute to a minute and a half summary of what was discussed in your group, and then we'll open up to a couple of questions from the floor. Group 1, Durand, would you mind starting?
All right, thank you, Erica. So in group 1, we got through the issues of concepts and theory currently being used, as well as methods. In terms of concepts and theory, we think that, well, the bibliometrics show that the firm level management studies are dominant, followed by innovation systems approaches. And the firm level management studies are informed by business management and management of technology, while in the innovation systems approach, it appears that technological innovation systems are very popular, and our respondents thought that it's because of the ease of use for policymakers, but also for students analytically. But the interest there for us is to challenge them to look at the policy relevance of those particular functions that are selected, as well as review the critical iterations of those functionalist frameworks. And in terms of methods, there appears to be a preference for quantitative research, and that may come out of various departments that privilege those ethics and things like that. But our participants thought that there is a severe limitation to quantitative research in terms of bringing out the granularity of activities on the ground, and they're encouraging that qualitative methods be looked into more closely for research and innovation studies in Africa. I think that's sort of the highlights, yeah.
Thanks, Diran, for that summary. The facilitator of the second group was Ayinde.
Maybe I can just step in. Thank you. Because I think she's having connection problems. Okay, yes, I can step in if you don't mind. In this group, there were quite a number of issues that were discussed. We ranged. We had a range of issues around concepts, theory. There were emerging methods mainly. There was so much conversation on methods, and there was a conversation around whether we should rethink grounded theory, qualitative research methods, case study approaches. Quite a number of issues came up under methods. And the sector, there were, the traditional sectors were, we felt they could also be revisited, but also thinking about the new technological, innovations that are coming up, clean techs, technologies addressing the challenges we're having. And of course, other issues had to do with, some, language issues, institutional, challenges in Africa, among other things. In principle, that's basically what we came up with. But there are quite a range of issues that have to be kind of, put together so that we can have a clear picture of what are the issues. Over to you, Erica.
Great, thanks so much for that summary, Anne. On the third group, was Shama the facilitator?
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca.
Go ahead, thank you.
Okay. I don't know. Can you see the screen or? Okay, good. So we were just a few people. So we have talked about triple helix and the human capital theories and the resource-based view theory. Also in the methods, we have talked about triangulation approach and qualitative and quantitative approach. In the sectors and the subject, we have talked mostly about digitalization and professional training and education, especially in sectors like and in relation with sectors like higher education and industry. About other issue, we have to talk about also digitalization politics in African Union. I've talked also about politics of training, professional trainings in many countries. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that summary. It's really great to see the collective discussion. Perhaps what I hear from where I am and seeing the summary from the three groups is that we might be at a stage where there has been a lot of utilization of existing frameworks and theories that have been very useful for us to apply and understand the dynamics of innovation in the context of Africa. There are certain areas that still remain unknown. So the existing methods, for instance, we discussed in our group the dominance of quantitative methods. How do we explore areas where there's no data, where we have to go and open new grounds and understand the dynamics? So there's a need to expand perhaps on the methodological approaches that we utilize, and that also applies to the sectors. So we need to focus more on the sectors that are core to our developmental issues in the continent. I would like to open it up, and I know that we're short with time, but I would like to open it up for a couple of questions from the floor, emerging from the reporting back from the different groups. Are there any questions, anybody? There's a lot of activity in the chat, so I believe that people have things in their mind, but perhaps they don't want to share it in out loud. Does anybody want to come up, or otherwise we will break into the next breakout session where the focus is going to be looking at the future of the field, and how do we see the field moving into the future. Last chance for anybody to come and ask any questions or raise any issues.
Erica, maybe just to comment, it's yes, a range of issues are coming up, particularly things that we need to be thinking about now with the challenges, the coffee, the new challenges Africa is having. So there are quite a number of, contribution from the participants on the need to think about these challenges that are confronting Africa, and how then do we approach them in terms of innovation and development research. And I think this is something which we'll get back to when we, in the discussion when the Abdulkader is going to be wrapping up everything. So I propose maybe we go to the groups, and so that because of time, and so that we can have some ample time towards the end to be able to have kind of a corrective agreement on where do we move from here.
Great. So I think let us use the time as Anne is suggesting into discussing in smaller groups. Just to let you know, alert you that after the second breakout room, we'll have more ample time for a plenary discussion, and hopefully by then, once we have reflected on how the field looks like now and how do we see it moving into the future, there will be more thoughts also. Connecting all of that with the initial presentations on how the field looked like 10 or 15 years ago and in the present. So bearing that in mind, I would like to send everybody off to the breakout groups and enjoy the discussion. Hello and welcome back from the breakout room. I hope you had a good discussion. Hopefully the second round, you had more experience and you were able to manage time better. Yes, let's move on perhaps with a short, brief report from each of the facilitators. Should we follow the same order, starting with Duran? I'm not sure if Anne is willing to also report this time, and then with Shama. Please, Duran, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Erica. So we looked at the next two themes in the discussion. So the sectors and topics in which researchers are engaged in. It appears that many researchers want to talk about digital innovation because that seems to be topical, cutting edge, but that has a bias towards IT. So our panelists asked why shouldn't we be looking at other sectors? So energy comes up, and fintech comes up a lot. And to the extent that we're looking at emerging technologies or frontier technologies, the question then is, are those being applied to developmental issues? One of the panelists suggested that indeed in the work that she's overseeing, that tends to be the case. And we agree that it's a way in which our community can intervene in the emerging technology discussion, whether it be blockchain, fintech, and other nanotechnology and other emerging technologies. What are the developmental implications? And this is a non-exhaustive set of issues. Mobility came up and so on. And then in terms of other issues, the relationship between innovation and gender came up in two dimensions. One is the need for more women scholars researching innovation and development. The other is the need for more attention to the gender dimension of innovation, which need not be done by only women. So it's important to create a contrast between those two issues, even if there may be some overlap. And the other alternative, an additional issue that came up was the relationship between innovation and entrepreneurship. In practice, they're related, but from a research point of view, innovation research and entrepreneurship research are in different communities. But as an innovation and development community, how do we intervene more systematically in terms of the role of innovation in SMMEs, as opposed to joining in this chorus that conflates the two? The last point was someone suggested that we should be talking about innovation in development as opposed to innovation and development, but we're unable to clarify that point. But I think it's something to mull over. Thank you, Erica.
Great. Thanks, Jan, for a great summary. Let's move on to the second group. Anne, would you like to summarize briefly in a minute or so?
Yeah, yes, yeah. Aida, do you want to do it? Maybe I can just do it quickly. Somebody to share the screen. As the screen is shared, I could actually summarize it because I have the notes with me. Most of what was coming out from our group was focusing much more on the concepts and the theory aspect of the field. And there was a kind of like an agreement that there is a concern when it comes to, the concepts and theories, application of what has been done, has been developed elsewhere, and how these concepts can actually be adapted to a context. So that should actually be a main, research area that needs to be looked into, and perhaps just start with just mapping out so that we can actually know what is there, and do we have a basis in terms of where to start. There was also an agreement in terms of methodology that yes, grounded theory, it seems to be kind of appealing for us to be able to come up with something which is relevant for Africa. But the question is, do we have foundations in terms of methods that we can actually build on rather than starting from the scratch? So that was something which was coming out very clearly. And of course, the issues of, we didn't discuss a lot around the issues of sectors and topics, but that was actually reflected in our previous conversation on what are the sectoral and topics that we need to be thinking about. And then there was some kind of an indication of where we need to go in terms of data. We need not start from scratch. And there were some few recommendations on where actually we can, the starting point in terms of, what we need to do. So a number of references were recommended, which I think we need to look at, when we consolidate the entire, conversation discussion together. Thank you. Back to you, Erica.
Great, thanks so much. I can see that there was a very rich discussion that you've had. May I ask Shama to please come in?
Yes, thank you, Erica. Do you hear me? Hello, do you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Yes, we
We
can
hear
hear
you.
you.
Okay, sorry. Margaret, would you share the screen? Thank you. So we have started our session talking about the COVID effect on nations and countries and on R&D. So we have mentioned that health is an important sector in innovation and development, and through this issue we have talked about learning how countries and nations learn from the actual conditions like the COVID one. So we have talked about theories of learning organization, learning universities, and this is led us to talk also about the applying tools of quality assurance in universities and total quality management in industry, and using all these tools to give high performance, to react, give a good reaction to the actual changes. So we have talked also about we have talked also about the motivation, or what drives countries or nations to innovation, like opportunities or threats, like the COVID, the actual issue. We have talked also about the informal sector, as Africa is a rich continent of resource and culture and energy, which give her the opportunity which gave her the opportunity to be very to give diverse opportunities of development and innovation. Also, the informal sector can be an amazing asset for innovation and development in Africa. We have talked also about the relation between digitalization and renewable energy, and how many countries, for example Algeria, is going through investment in the transformation of energy, renewable energy, solar energy, and so on. This is a summary of our session. Thank you, Eric.
And thanks so much. I'm aware of time, but I would like to maybe take a minute to try and unpack what I've gathered from the discussions, and then open it up for a couple of questions if there are any, before we give the floor to Prof. Abdelkader to give some concluding remarks. So what I heard in the discussions and the reporting back from the different groups and the Padlet text, which we were not able to cover extensively, but there were very good summaries produced by the facilitators. It seems that in terms of concepts and theoretical frames, what becomes clear to me is that there is a need to expand and interrogate the concepts and frames that we're using. The issue around adapting them to the context of Africa keeps coming up. So some research needs to be done here. There are some, and in this vein, there are some sort of suggestions on what kind of theoretical approaches can we use to sort of build up from our context that really capture the reality in which we are sitting. There are different suggestions, such as grounded theory or new theoretical frameworks that need to be developed to be able to capture that. So I think contextualization to me is sort of the key theme that keeps on coming up. And in this vein, there's been suggestions to converse or perhaps engage with different theoretical approaches. There was a suggestion, for instance, in our group, to better understand the relationship between society and technology, perhaps drawing more from science and technology studies and the theoretical frameworks they sort of avail. In terms of methods, sorry, there's been also mentioned to theories of learning, organizations of capacity building, things that really help respond to our problems. So theory must be reflective of the context and also the needs that we have in terms of analysis. In terms of methods, also again another issue that has been recurrent is the need to look beyond the predominantly quantitative approach that we find in our field. So again, the discussion is about, you know, how do we utilize methods that allow us to open new ground, to explore undiscovered areas that our current methodologies don't allow us to shed light on. So case studies, historical analysis, participatory approaches, and so on have been mentioned as an expansion of the methodological approaches that are predominant at the moment. In terms of sectors, I heard many different, I won't try to summarize, but issues around energy transformation, climate change, agriculture, entrepreneurship, gender issues, and digital technologies. How can digital technologies help us address some of our developmental challenges in the continent? I will leave it with this reflection, so attempt to summarize from my side. There have been many other issues that have been raised. I will open it up for 5 minutes maximum before we hand it to Prof. Abdelkader to make the final remarks. Any questions, please, or comments, or reflections?
Hello, Erica.
Please go ahead.
Yeah.
And please introduce yourselves.
It's Kinde Medase. I just want to ask something, just for you in particular. You are heading, a unit, in the university. And do you think, in the area of theory, having to develop grounded theory, having to develop, some theoretical concepts that will underpin the innovation endeavors in Africa? Do you think this can be, given to, for example, emerging researchers? You say, okay, for PhD students, if we want you to find out, theoretical underpinnings about innovation and development regarding Africa, what can you find? If you are looking at empirical aspect, can we actually give these to these students to explore? Is it a thing? Is it a project that can be undertaken either by AfricaLics or by the different universities and connections, linked to Africa?
Anybody is welcome to comment here. My own response to that is that it's not up to us to give it. I think emerging researchers should take it and should do it. There is, I think, a need for more theoretical work to take place in the continent. We've been, I think, overall, there's been a lot of application of existing frameworks and utilized for analysis. But there's been little theoretical work. Our next speaker, Abdelkader, he's been busy developing new theory with the framing innovation systems in the context of emerging economies. And I think much more of that needs to be done. And the younger generations are very well placed, I think, to take on that work. But anybody else is welcome to comment or to come in.
I think Rasmus has raised his hand, or is it not Rasmus? Yeah.
Yes, it is, if I may. So in the introduction by UN, you mentioned, I think, what is the first piece of literature, or at least in the type of framing that we are using, and that is the book by Mamu and others, which was called Putting Africa First, which is from 2003. So it won't be long until we have now actually the 20 years anniversary of that book coming out. And I think that was a significant landmark. So I think it would be interesting to do something that celebrates that book after 20 years. I guess that could be done in a way which is helpful in terms of the discussions that that we've had, and which is summarized very neatly by Erica. So I guess that the title of a follow-up book could be Putting Africa First in Theory Building. And I think it would be very interesting to collect some of the AfricaLics themes, whether we do it by sector or by particular problems, and try to collect some of the insights that have been coming out of this network over the last 10 years at least, in illuminating these issues also from a theoretical perspective. So that was just a suggestion and idea.
Great, thanks for that intervention, Rasmus. I'm sorry, I can't see the hand raising function for some reason. So if you have raised your hand, please speak up.
Rajesh has wanted to talk.
Yeah. Thank you for this wonderful session. It has been an innovation. The chat room and all, that has been excellent. Unfortunately, I couldn't participate because of my shortcomings with respect to the technology, and I was in fact I was traveling. So that is excellent. Congratulations to Margaret and all the team, and also congratulations to Erica and Becky for this for their presentation and chairing respectively. So I just want to place to the fore a very simple suggestion, which is about the agricultural innovation systems. That concept is being developed, but it is personally I feel that that concept or that framework has been developed to a minimal extent. It is almost from the flow of literature, I think it is in a standstill. And it is specifically the requirement of the global countries from the global south, like India and the entire continent of Africa. So my suggestion is that we have to give more stress to develop that concept into a proper theoretical conceptual frame, which to the PhD student or the early career researcher, which should be in a form that would be easy for the early career to take up and apply. That is very important. So from many examples with whom I could interact, I have a feeling that the limitations of this the framework is taking a lot of time away from the student. So it takes a lot of time for the student to get into the track and to come to the empirical aspect of it. So if we put an effort, this frame can be further developed, and it can be made something like a ready-made thing for a student to apply. So this is my proposal. Thank you very much.
Thanks. That's a very concrete area in which there's a need for theoretical development and a call for the community to really develop and polish that approach. Thanks, Rajesh, for that intervention. I think unless there are any other burning issues, I would like to give the floor to Prof. Abdelkader Jaflat to make some
Erica,
remarks.
Maybe before Erica, should we go? Were there any questions raised in the beginning of the chat that we needed addressing? I think we had promised to come back to some of them.
Right. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. There were some questions as to I was taken over by the clock. I was looking
it's
at
fine.
time.
It's fine. Yeah, maybe just.
But perhaps there are some of the those that posed the questions at the beginning want to bring them back.
Yeah.
So I think there was a question around the first question, was that there appears not to be a huge amount of research on innovation, FDI, and export. Is this correct, and what could be the possible reasons? Was one question, the first question.
I seem to have seen quite a lot of quantitative analysis of exports and the connection with innovation in the context of Africa, particularly because there are sort of large databases that allow that type of analysis. I have come across a few studies, but I'm not sure if others have a similar experience of a shortage of literature in this respect.
I mean, I would agree. I think there's quite a significant degree, a lot of literature that looks at a macro level and at a national level. The interesting question is whether we interrogate it or interact with it sufficiently enough as a community. So we talked in our group about the material related to STI indicators, for example, in one part of our discussions. And so there's quite a lot of work that's been done on, the degree to which there is innovation and the impact on innovation on growth in countries. But when you look at the areas of the papers that are presented at GlobalX and AfricaLics conferences, they do seem to be more at firm level discussions and systems building more generally. Although I think when we interrogate the papers that are looking at national innovation systems, they're often coming at it from an FDI, growth perspective. There was a second comment relating to, let me just list a few of the questions. It was an interesting question from Ameha on whether we have collaborations with other similar research groups working in the field. It would be interesting to know from different people who they think would be the useful or relevant similar research groups to AfricaLics. And then there was another question on what innovative ideas and approaches from AfricaLics in support of conducting research. So how could we do more research? I think was that is related to innovation and development problems in Africa. And then a lot of people I've noticed on Twitter and in this and in the chat have focused on the question of why innovation studies is ranked so low and what could be the cause. And I think those were the main comments and questions. So I don't know if other people have thoughts.
I think maybe for the interest of time, can we take those three and then we can make sure that we don't extend the discussion for too long. I may comment on the last point, and I think the two questions about AfricaLics and the collaboration with other research networks and sort of ideas of supporting the research and so on. I think I would perhaps Becky and Anne are well placed to take those. If I may comment about why innovation studies, and I remember that as one of the first questions where I think in one of my slides I showed that the innovation community is quite active, and there were about 77% of the scholars had published in the past 5 years. Even though we've seen a growth in publications, in the number of publications and journal articles, when you compare it to other regions, it's still extremely low. So in relative terms to ourselves, 10, 15 years ago, we have grown quite a lot. But when we compare ourselves with other regions, we still rank quite low. Also, another issue is the types of journals, the impact factor of the journals in which we publish. So African scholars tend to sometimes publish in journals that are not indexed. that are not so visible for the international community. In some cases, our publications come in the forms of policy briefs, of working papers, of other types of formats that are perhaps more targeting different groups, particularly policymakers and so on, in our desire to sort of influence policy decisions. So it's not always the case that we feature in those sort of high impact publications that would make it to the list where we see the impact factors of African research. That would be my take on that question, but perhaps I have other views. Becky and Anne, would you like to take on the couple of questions about AfricaLics?
Becky, can you go ahead in the interest of time?
Yeah, so I mean, AfricaLics is very much housed within the Globelix network. We do have some links, I mean, through individual scholars with other areas, but I think it also depends on where you come from in terms of your discipline. And so I know that there are a number of us within the network who are more business oriented. And so we will have links with international business and international management networks. Others are more interested and come from a science and technology studies background, and so are more focused or potentially members of networks in that area, and others of us have very sectorally focused interests, so agricultural economist networks, or even just agricultural extension networks. Or similar ones in health or IT, etc. So at the moment, AfricaLics does not have any formal collaboration with any of those groups, but individual researchers obviously do. So I think a very interesting question, and something that we really need to think more about in terms of whether we would like to have more formal collaboration with other groups moving forward. So let me leave it there.
Great. Thanks, Becky. Thanks everybody for posting those questions. We will move to the last part of the program, and I would like to ask Prof. Abdelkader Jeflat to give some concluding remarks, which will send us for the conclusion of this webinar. The floor is yours, Abdelkader. Thank you. You are still muted. We still muted. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can. Great.
Hang on, just a second. Yes, well, thank you. That's very, very rich, actually. And I think I would be too ambitious to say we're going to summarize everything which was said. But I thank everybody, but I thank also particularly Erika, who has done a part of my job, because she has been able to put in a nutshell what was being discussed in those Padlet's sessions. In fact, I'll try, and I hope time will allow. I am given 10 minutes to react briefly, I think, to the presentations, one few words. For the reaction to Padlets, I probably go along with the summaries which Erika made, but I can recall some of the points. I was asked also to give a certain retrospective of the past of AfricaLics, what has happened, what are the important moments, I would say. I will probably go into that in a few minutes, and some views about the future. Well, for the presentations, I think the excellent work was done by Erika and Becky on presentations of all these figures and statistics and trends. And I think it's quite revealing that things are moving very fast and in a way, in a positive way, I would say, even if there are weaknesses here and there, like gender not evolving in the same way, etc. I agree with most of what has been said by Becky, that the need for a wider application of knowledge from lead sectors, for instance. I think it's an important issue because we tend to see that we have looked at this in the past, that knowledge is not migrating from kind of powerful centers with accumulated knowledge to the rest of the economy. And I would say it's not impulsing neither innovation nor even growth. The other point which I found interesting is the exclusion of large numbers of key actors from the activities, from the research. And I do appreciate there has been some progress here, but we still remain unclear to what's happening in terms of I&D in informal sector, in agricultural, large working numbers of agricultural outlets, SMEs, and all these are things which are important and worthy looking at again. And of course, we have seen some progress for agriculture. For instance, 23% were in Dar es Salaam, which is not too bad. And need to engage more with political economy. That is also an important issue, because I think we have tended to isolate our studies on strictly the I&D issues rather than link it up with much wider, broader context, which will give some understanding to the phenomenon, but also give it some exposure to policymakers, I believe. I think I was also very interested by Erika's work, particularly on one or two aspects. On the, of course, low female representation is something which we suspected that has evolved, perhaps, but not to the extent that one would like it to be. Of course, this is quite surprising, because when you see universities, gender balance is really for females. So there is something there which should be investigated. Why a proportion of females are not going into research, and particularly of these areas. I gather that some areas there are many more higher proportions of females. And of course, the publication Africa publishes, that raises a very important issue, because there is, whenever publications are made with foreign editors, that's probably, of course, not they are not accessible to the readers in Africa. They don't have the right impact, and so I think that should be important. On capacity building, I would say that the training and education area is not something which is really to regret that it is developing. I think education as a whole is really one important issue, and we have seen it in various papers and various conferences we've had. So I think there should be a balance between capacity building and research, but not one at the expense of the other, in my view. The other thing which I think was in Becky, but came out also in the sessions, is how are we doing in terms of methodological approach? Do we implement or those developed in the North and to the reality of Africa? Do we have really, can we think out of new paradigms, new methods, designing new tools, because which are more appropriate? I think that is one of the key issues. For the Padlets, I think that Erica did a fantastic job, and I think I agree most of with the summary which they did, particularly on the second part. I mean, the third part, of course, system approach and policy relevance have come up, and also on the methods too much. On methodology, we had both too much on quantitative approach and not so much for case studies, but others have put the balance differently. Perhaps should be more case studies because they're more indicated for African reality. And sectors digitalization come out on various occasions, and I think it is quite right because we are at very important time. For the future, of course, I think I agree with what Erica said on concepts, the need to adapt them. I've seen it, and new frameworks, context appropriate to context are important also. And of course, engage with society rather than simply for academic dynamics is very important, and we need to explore new grounds for the future. For the second aspect, which is historical perspective. I mean, I was quite interested what Rasmus said, and of course, we all all aware that this is an important landmark and starting Africa First, and we happen to be part of that book also. So we're happy that it really triggers off dynamics which we are now we live with AfricaLics. And it is important that we do something to celebrate as that. But in my view, there is also another landmark which probably passed unnoticed, and that is Dakar in 2009. Why I'm saying that? Because GlobalIC for the first time was in developing country. Before that, it went through all the so-called BRICS, with the exception of Mexico. And this is where GlobalIC was confronted directly with the reality. And then I think there was a kind of group of us, a group of scholars saying that perhaps we should renew our paradigm. We have been thinking too much on catching up problematics, and many African countries are really far away from that sort of concern. Really, the concern is about sustainability, about poverty reduction, about inequality, etc. So I think we do away with catching up. We have to think in different model, which is probably how this dynamics of innovation emerge, and not in a systemic way, not necessarily in a systemic. There may be other ways. So let's look at this on the ground and see what logic and what framework we can develop, and give more visibility to all the below the radar innovation dynamics and that sort of thing. So I think Dakar was also an important moment where the pre-catch-up, if I may call them, have really marked the territory and say we should be thinking in different terms. That's important. Now with the but of course all the other conferences which followed Dakar are important, but this one, in my view, completed what had happened in Aalborg with that book. Looking back at how we worked on the scientific board, and of course, I think we started as a homogeneous group, but as time went by, there was some split within the group, and which is a quite positive, a healthy thing to happen, because that means there is debate, live debate, and healthy debate going on within the group between those who wanted the informal, informal sector, below the line agriculture, those who tended rather to go for industry, services, industrial complexes, innovation systems. We had also a split in the analytical tools, some wanting to appropriate these so-called universal instruments and analytical tools and models from the north, versus those who really thought that they are not appropriate, and they probably we need to either do major adaptation or think in terms even of new tools, home ground. And some talk about undoing, rebuilding, and doing models and rebuilding them. We had also split in the use of national innovation system as it stands. Those who wanted to adapt it and use it, or those who wanted to break away from it, and this is the emergence group sort of, and also system thinking is itself questioned, because we have the traditional so-called system thinking group community, national system innovation, but versus growing trend of triple helix group coming strongly into the community, and perhaps there we have a discussion to how can we put together those two different approaches. How can they be either complement each other? Well, there is a discussion that that's on. And of course, as we went along, whether also those who wanted to improve research capabilities, align them to international standards, and those who wanted really more policy dialogue and to inform policy making sphere rather than aligning with international standards, because Africa has urgent issues, urgent problems to solve, rather than simply being ranked in the high journals and hierarchies. I mean, this is just, I'm being very rapid and schematic, of course. As we went along, I think there was some cumulative learning through the process of AfricaLics developing, and Becky highlighted that in Maputo there was 7 areas which gaps, and of course this was to structure research projects. But as we went along there, any time at every occasion, we added on the traditional concerns, which are, of course, informal sector, which is sustainability, which and that's agriculture. We added some concern which are more or less aligned to the policy agenda worldwide. In Kigali, we introduced sustainability, sustainable development, because of the last post 2015 agenda. In Oran, there was a commodity crisis and desindustrialization, and the need for diversification. So emergence of industrial innovation system came at the forefront. In Dar es Salaam, we had the African, the world was moving into this transformative trend, which is of course new, because the linear kind of were not fit for bringing the changes we wanted, and because the African Union itself had strategic framework for socio-economic transformation, and then so transformative innovation came as a key element. Just to say that, in fact, in AfricaLics, while we were doing things really specific to Africa and grounded in African reality, we kept also getting in new issues and kind of to enrich the dialogue, but we also in line with the major global issues throughout the world. This is more or less the logic of how we worked. Now I will not go because I think I have hardly any time left. Just a few thoughts about the future. Of course, yeah. I think we still need to find out about African innovation system structure and dynamics. We have started, but I think we are sort of halfway in the middle of that, and we need more context-specific studies than we have done in the past, and that requires perhaps more, certainly more deeper investigation of sectors, which we have tended perhaps not to investigate systematically. And that raises the question of mode of financing, mode of financing is important. And I think we have a deficit there on mode of financing, either at macro level, but also at firm level, which now with the new dynamics, it's a key issue because it's good to talk about all the models and theories and frames, but if we don't have also the right support of that, that might be a little problematic. Of course, I will not go in all these areas which have, I think in Dar es Salaam, we had panels, and those panels, in my view, constitute summary of all kind of areas, key areas we should be looking at. It is renewable energies, and in the first panel, and the case building capability, agricultural innovation system with inclusive growth, the role of the state for inclusive transformation, and all the transformative innovation policy research, the role of rural innovation and entrepreneurship, and engineering, education, development, and growth. Those are important issues in addition to the fourth industrial revolution. So I think we all agree that these are key domains for the future to engage and raise the question how through the ID lens we can actually bringing a new analysis and give them a new basis. The other aspect, which I don't know how much time I have, but perhaps in a nutshell, the issue which is mineral resources a driving engine for innovation to move from resource cost to resource blessing. The point which raised in the presentation of Becky, as I think is crucial to my view, because I think we have there tremendous accumulated experience, capabilities, knowledge, which could be very easily transferred and used as a new breath, and these sectors could play a role as an engine for a new ID, innovation and development dynamics in the new era. And of course, the issue of building African knowledge platforms is also an important in ICT, biotechnology, in health, energy, transport. All these are issues which are important. What I see also as an important aspect is Africa has the tremendous youth potential coming up here, particularly with regard to digital evolution. But I think we have to think a lot more on that potential. I think we definitely need to stop. I am perhaps being provocative, thinking of youth solely in terms of inclusiveness, like the disabled and others. I think youth is really a new engine of growth, the new mineral wealth of Africa. There is a paradigm shift there, because we need to build capabilities amongst the young people with new systems, new ID, youth-driven, if I may so, dynamics. This could be also said to some extent agenda, and reinsert the firm wealth creator into the heart of our preoccupations, innovation, knowledge management. It has been, I think, a poor and neglected area in my view. And civil society and social innovation, although some said perhaps that it is not on the agenda, on the priorities, but I believe that it is on the priorities, because as we have seen during the COVID situation, and the social innovation and civil society has, at least in some parts of Africa, played a tremendous role into bringing things to work, and into listening of the hardship of what COVID caused. And so this has been quite an opportunity to see that transformation occurred at a fairly short notice, because this COVID situation was not something one was expecting to take that that magnitude. And of course, the fourth industrial revolution, digital transformation, it is a tremendous occasion. We've seen that Africa shouldn't be left out. It isn't left out. I think Ned is here with us, has shown that fantastic progress is made on the first, for instance, the artificial intelligence is moving in the right pace, I believe. But how about the other dimensions of industrial fourth industrial revolution, like digital transformation, and what political support on top of the instrumental support, and what forces to mobilize to for that trend. And of course, I think one important dimension mentioned that the COVID and post-COVID, I mean, COVID situation has raised issues, important issues. How does IND theories, thinking, model adapt to this new situation, which is rather specific? The tremendous potential, I talked about it in terms of creativity, entrepreneurship, leapfrogging, and the need to know more and to make that these new things which are happening more sustainable. It isn't necessarily, I call them in an article, the dormant capabilities. I think those not necessarily take this opportunity to make them structurally within the dynamics of African development and not simply during this crisis. So this is an important question. Make it a turning point and make it sustainable. Find effective ways to upgrade the capacities of users and stimulate demand for knowledge, which we have seen occurring in this COVID situation. And of course, to be in line with what's happening in Africa, Africa is in a new, there's a new free trade, AfCFT, being launched, creating a single market of goods. That's $3 trillion economic bloc, 1.3 billion people concerned. And I think, believe that IND should, innovation development should address these issues of joint, connecting innovation systems, neighborhood innovation systems, common and joint R&D project. How can we, in AfricaLics community, accompany these big projects? And what new division of labor on the basis of accumulated knowledge, expertise, competence pools, what concept, what analytical framework, what comparative studies? And finally,
okay, you're coming to an end. We have to ask you to.
The last is back to statistic figures. The geographical imbalance of deficit, I wanted to comment on that. As you see, the challenge is, I think we should address these issues as well, where extra effort is needed to strengthen the ID problematic and interest by more exposure to this part of Africa. As you could see, I mean, 3% in North Africa, 6% Central Africa. I think there is the signal that we should be taking this seriously. And so that's certainly with networks, with partnering with networks, regional hubs come into it in a very, very significant, very topical, that should be accelerated in terms of strategy. And when we looked at in Maputo, in projects, we see that throughout this trajectory, only a few projects could be seed funded, and this is not enough considering all what has been happening, the efforts made. So I think more efforts and resources and emphasis should be put on this as a way forward. And thank you very much. Sorry to have been long.
Thank you so much for a really good wrap up. I think you've managed to somehow link the discussions to the history of AfricaLics. You've sort of brought it closer to the key issues of Africa and our quest for transformation. I like what you mentioned of activating somehow these dormant capabilities for the long-term, long-run transformation of the continent, involving firms and broader society and policy. And you sort of highlighted all the challenges that lie ahead of us in terms of methodologies, theoretical, conceptual, measurement, and indicators, and so on. So all of this discussion, together with the breakout rooms and all the points that have been raised, are extremely useful, I think, to take our community forward. I would like to maybe give the floor to Becky to perhaps explain how this will continue, how this conversation will continue in following workshops.
Thanks,
Thank
Erica.
you very much. Thanks, Erica.
And thanks, Abdulkader, for the comments. I've already tweeted some of them, and I note that the chat has had a very interesting set of discussions around some of the dichotomies that you've been talking about when you talk about the way in which different researchers have been looking at different issues. So this is just one of a monthly seminar series, a webinar series that is happening all year. We have a follow-up webinar, which is addressing similar issues to this one and the one in February in April. We have Rasigan Mahara. He will be speaking on the history of development and innovation studies. At the same time, not the first week of April, because that is Easter, but the second week of April. But moving forward beyond that, all the webinars will be the first Thursday of every month, and we have a whole lot of them scheduled. So please join us in the discussions moving forward. And thank you all very much for staying with us so long today.
Thank you.
Yes, adding to that vote of thanks, I would like to thank again everybody. I see that we've had around 40 participants staying with us for the entire event. We started off with a few more, but it hasn't been actually a very large number of people that dropped. So we all stayed to go on with this discussion, which is testament of the importance of these topics that we've touched upon. So thanks again to the organizing team. It's been great working with Margaret and Becky and Anne and the team in ACTS. So thanks a lot for putting this together. The facilitators, you've done a great job, and of course our last intervention by Prof. Abdulkader. Thank you so much. With this, I would like to thank everybody again and wish you a very nice evening.
Yep.
I think the seminar can be concluded.
Thank you.